Alright guys, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at password selection and storage. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. So first off, let's make sure that we have the same sort of basic foundation so that we know what we're going to be talking about. So what is a password? It's going to be just one of the most basic forms of authentication that's out there. It's something that you know. Ideally, they're going to be easy to remember, but they're going to be hard to guess. So these can help services to determine that you are who you say you are. And in theory, they're going to keep out unauthorized users from your accounts. So take, for example, can you even imagine if there was some sort of service online that didn't ask you for a password? They just asked you for your username. It would say, "Who are you? I'm T. Stallnaker Coding." And it says, "All right, I'll take your word for it. Come on in," and gives you full access. That would just be crazy. So that's where passwords come in. So why are passwords bad? Well, they really aren't. It's not necessarily the passwords that's the problem, it's people. People are really bad at remembering their passwords, and they're also bad at picking passwords. And these two problems go hand in hand. In some ways, one causes the other and vice versa. And when you put them both together, it's when you really get a storm of just horrible, horrible passwords. So a lot of people, maybe some of you out there, think that you're more clever than, I don't know, the average bear, and you can do something that no one else has ever thought of, and that's going to make your password super, super secure. And the problem is, odds are you're not the only person that thought of this, and when everybody's trying to be clever, no one's being clever. So some examples of these things would be using leet speak in your passwords, which is like an old internet slang for replacing A's with at signs, S's with dollar signs, the common symbol substitutions, uh, O's with zeros, those sorts of things. That would be leet speak. Another common thing would be keyboard shifting. So instead of just typing out, let's say your password's password, instead of typing out password, you would put your fingers on the home row keys of the keyboard, shift down exactly one key. So like your pointer fingers would be on G and K instead of F and J, for example. And then you would make the key motions as if you typed password. So everything's just been shifted over. And a third example would be like a different length in the sequence. So a really common password could be just the numbers 1 through 9. So maybe you think you're really clever because you've just done 1 through 6. Or you want your password to be the digits of pi. And you're like, well, no one's going to guess my password because they're going to have to figure out how many digits I went. But the problem is you can just brute force and just keep guessing and adding digits until eventually you do, well, get in. So here are a couple of the most common passwords. These are freely available on the internet. There's tons of these databases out there. I do encourage you to go look, see what you can find. Here in this first column, we've got NordPass 2021. We've got Splash Data 2019. And then this is from a GitHub repo of the 10,000 most used passwords. And we'll notice that there are some similarities here. All these passwords just use digits and lowercase letters. There's no uppercase, no symbols, no nothing. Very simple passwords. Many of these are just numbers, and they're just numbers in sequence. We see QWERTY, which is one of those keyboard layouts. So that's on that top row, QWERT, and then Y. And we see passwords here. And interestingly, password's not number 1, but it ranks number 2 in the 10,000 most used. And it's got a high, it's in the top 10, all three here. So let's see if we can drill in a little bit deeper with these common passwords. So there is a longer list that's got the top 1,000,000 most used passwords. It's available on that same GitHub site. So what I did was I took that and I did a little bit of processing on it. And using Python, just read through it, figured out that most of the passwords are between 7 and 9 characters. There's a good spread, but 7 and 9 make up the vast majority of them. And if you think about it for a second, that kind of makes sense because the common wisdom, the basic wisdom out there is that a password of length 8 is usually pretty secure. That's like the magic go-to number. So plus or minus 1 on 8 seems reasonable for for a good password. Then more interestingly, we can look and see what characters these passwords are actually using, like what are these passwords composed of. And here in this blue slice on the pie chart, making up over a third of the passwords, are like the ones that we just saw, where they just have digits and lowercase letters. This gray slice is only the lowercase letters, not even using any digits. So it would be like the word password, all lowercase. This sort of maroon red slice, this is using digits, and that's it, just digits, just numbers. So taken together, these three slices probably make up around 80-ish% of the pie. And these are only lowercase letters and digits. It's an alphabet of only 36 characters, and we'll see in a second why that's a problem. So if your password is using symbols, you fall into this little tiny slice here. So if I was an attacker trying to guess somebody's password with just brute force, I know a majority of the passwords fall here. I wouldn't even waste my time bothering with symbols. So we'll talk about that more in just a bit. So there's another article out there, the links below on the slide, and I'll also include it in the description of this video. Really interesting article where Troy Hunt goes through and looks at some of these data breaches and analyzes these passwords and looks for commonalities between them and categorizes them into different groups. And in it, he finds these categories, and these are the respective percentages for them. Passwords they can be put into these groups: person name, place name, some like dictionary word, a number, just 2 words. And this one's really interesting. It's in the email, which means, let's say your Gmail is I love Harry Potter at gmail.com. Then your password is also I love Harry Potter. So your email, your username, is the same as your password, which is horrible security. But we see that in these breaches, 2.6%, that's a non-trivial amount, had that going on. And then we see like a short phrase, there's a keyboard pattern that's like QWERTY we saw before. And then there's this big slice that's got no pattern. They didn't fit into any of these clean categories, but there are some patterns that exist within that slice. And one of those that he discusses is pop culture references. So if your password had something to do with Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Marvel, Star Wars, something like that, it would fall into this sort of other category. And a thing about this, you're probably picking things that have some sort of a significance to you. So a person name could be like a brother, a wife, a son, something like that. I don't know, best friend, a girlfriend. Something that someone that knew you could guess, somebody that did some research. Place name could be where you're born, where you live, where you went to school, where you went to college, these sorts of things. So by using those as your passwords, you're opening up an attack vector for someone that can do a targeted attack, which is a really bad idea. And the data here sort of suggests that that might be going on, but just keep that in mind when you're picking your passwords. Try not to use anything personally identifiable. So now that we've seen all of these leaked passwords and just how many of these data breaches there are, I mean, in fact, we just saw in that little pie chart 1 million of the most common passwords. You're probably wondering, well, is my password in that million? Because that's a lot of passwords. If you want to know if your password has been leaked before, you can go to this website, haveibeenpwned.com. And this will also be in the description of this video. I'll put a link there. What you can do is you can just type in your password. It's also got a nice little field for emails if you want to know if your email has ever been exposed in a leak. So, but we'll talk about the passwords for now. You can put your password in here, click pwned, and it will search through the databases and let you know if you've been pwned, and if you have, how many times that password has been pwned. So for example, these little dots here, this password, has been seen in the database, or databases more accurately, over 9 million times. So this is a horrible password, one which you should never use. And if we were to remove these dots, you would know that the password is password. So it makes sense that this one is horrible. but it is still surprising it's been used so much. Because these are distinct usages. So distinct entries in these breaches. So let's talk a little bit about entropy. So this is going to be why the length of your password and the number of characters or the number of different possible characters in your password matters. So we'll talk about a kind of a small password for now. It's just going to be 5 characters long. So we can imagine it like these 5 buckets. And first, let's look at the digits. That's going to be the only alphabet we'll allow, is the numbers between 0 and 9. So here you can pick any number between 0 and 9, do the same thing there, and there. So if we want to know the total number of possible combinations, well, that's 10 here, times 10 here, times 10, times 10, times 10, which is 10 to the 5th. That's 100,000 different passwords that we can get, which sounds like a pretty big number, but when you realize that computers can just crunch through these things really fast, brute force attack would get that every time. So just using the digits isn't going to be enough. So what if we add the lowercase letters like we saw in some of those other passwords? That increases our alphabet to 36 because now we've got the 10 digits and we've also got the 26 alphabet characters. So for each of these buckets, we've got 36 choices. So 36 to the 5th, that gives us around 6.5 million. That is a significant jump from 100,000. Still, it's brute forceable, but it's going to take a whole lot longer. So why not make it better? If I was going to try to crack passwords using this most naive brute force way, which we will discuss in more detail in a second, you could stop here because we just saw that over 80% of the passwords in the most common password list fall below this threshold. There's no sense in going any further. But let's keep going just to see how this just blows up. So if we add the uppercase letters, that's another 26 added to the alphabet, which gives us 62 total characters. So 62 to the 5th is 916 million, which is once again significantly larger than what we were just dealing with. And then the last category here, we add the symbols. And for the sake of simplicity, I just added all the symbols that are on a just English keyboard. Some services won't let you use all the symbols in your password. I know some won't let you use the tilde or the tick, but it's just 2, so I went ahead and included them. And that gives us 94 characters. And 94 to the 5th is 7 billion, a little over 7 billion. So this is just huge improvements. And that's just for a password of length 5. So the bigger this number of possible passwords is, the better, because it's the more that an attacker is going to have to guess if they're going to naively try to get your password. So the other way that you can get these numbers to be bigger is by increasing the number of buckets you have up here, which is equivalent to increasing the length of your password. So if we were to add another bucket here, there'd be 6 of them. It would be 10 to the 6th for that first example, right? And that would be 1 million. So it's an order of magnitude larger. So increasing the length of your password does wonders for increasing the possibilities, the possible combinations. So it increases the entropy, as does increasing the alphabet. All right, let's move on from that. So you want to pick strong passwords, and strong passwords are going to be unique for each service. I think this little cartoon here perfectly illustrates that, because it doesn't really matter how strong your password is. You could have the perfect password, but if something outside of your control happens, like maybe someone's looking over your shoulder, they steal your password, or maybe it was leaked somehow, some other way, then they can use that password to try to access your other accounts. And it's not going to be secure anymore. So you want, especially for sensitive accounts, you want to be using different passwords for each one. These passwords that you have, you want them to be a combination of different alphanumeric characters. There should be both uppercase and lowercase, and you want to include symbols. And whatever you do, do not include common words, phrases, names, and places, which we saw was very common from Troy Hunt's article and the data that we looked at. And will motivate even further why this is a bad idea, even if you're not using personally identifiable information. But just hold on a second, we'll see that. And lastly, don't use passwords that have been previously cracked or leaked. If the password is in that have I been pwned database, don't touch it, don't use it. There are ways that attackers can take that password and guess that is yours. And in fact, it will happen. So don't. Once the password is out there, it is no longer secure, regardless of what it looks like, regardless of how long it is. Okay. So let's talk about password cracking. So the most naive way you can go about doing this is something called a brute force attack. And this is what we've really been talking about up until this point. So you're going to guess all the possible password combinations. So let's actually just work through an example here. So you can imagine it kind of like a bunch of monkeys on typewriters, just literally pounding away at the keyboard, guessing everything. Now we're going to be a little bit more systematic in our example, though. So our alphabet is between 0 and 9, all the digits between 0 and 9. And the password that we've selected is 404. 404 password not found, right? Anyway, and what our brute force algorithm is going to do is going to guess every password of length 3. So we're going to guess 000. No. Is 001 the password? No. 002. It's going to go all the way up. Just keep counting up. And it's going to say, what about 404? 404 is the password. Bada bing, bada boom. We're in. We got access to the account. So obviously, as we increase the entropy of the password, we increase its length, we increase the alphabet size, this is going to get harder and harder to do. We're going to need more and more monkeys to be pounding at the keyboard. That's why entropy is important. Now, there's a more sophisticated way that we can do these brute force attacks, and that would be using a dictionary. And this little cartoon here, I think, summarizes it really, really well. The wizard comes up to this door. He says, "Open sesame." The door doesn't open, so he tries abracadabra, the next magic word. Still doesn't open. He walks away. He grabs his dictionary. He comes up and he just starts reading through it, word after word after word after word. Eventually, at least he thinks he will, eventually he'll hit a word that will open the door. That's exactly what attackers can do as well. So they'll use a literal like English dictionary, for example, and they will just spam these little password fields trying to get in. So if you used a word in the dictionary, you're not safe. No matter how long it is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much entropy it would have if it had to be randomly guessed because it's in the dictionary, right? That actually decreases the size by quite a bit. There's only like a couple 100,000 English words that are regularly used. And this can be made a little bit more powerful by using substitutions. More sophisticated dictionary attacks do this, where they'll do those common leet-speak substitutions, where they'll replace an A with an at, an S with a dollar sign. They'll mix and match the uppercase and lowercase characters, which increases the number of entries in the dictionary, increases the number of things they have to guess, but also increases the chances that they're going to get hit if you tried to do something a little bit clever. And there are tools out there, open source, you can download them that do this. John the Ripper is an example. It actually uses something called a rainbow table, which if you stick with me, we will discuss in just a bit. And these dictionary attacks are the reason why you never, ever, ever, ever want to use a leaked password. Because there is a dictionary of leaked passwords. It's basically what haveibeenpwned.com is using. You can take that. For example, I could take that list of 1 million most common passwords and use that as my dictionary and just go through them one at a time because they're ranked from the most common to the least common, right? And just put those in until eventually I got in. And I might not, but for a vast majority of people and accounts, I probably would. So that's what a dictionary attack is. So how can you stop a dictionary attack? How can you stop these brute force attacks? Well, if you're on the server side of things, if you're building one of these systems, limit the number of login attempts. It's this really simple thing. And I'm sure many of you have seen this sort of error before. It's like too many failed login attempts. And then it makes you stop. iPhones do this too, where if you get your passcode wrong too many times, it's going to make you wait. And the wait gets progressively longer the more that you're wrong. This prevents bots from just spamming. And even if they are going to just keep spamming, it increases that wait time such that they're not going to be able to make 1 million guesses. And that basically solves the problem, right? It can be annoying for users when they type their password in wrong, but ultimately it's for the greater good. And another thing you can consider adding is this thing called a CAPTCHA, and you've definitely seen these around. Uh, Ideally, what a CAPTCHA is going to do is make you prove that you're human. It's basically the "I'm not a robot" button that you check. For, a lot of these will look like these little image recognition things. So you go and say, let's select all the little boxes with traffic lights, or we'll orient this little chipmunk squirrel thing so it's facing upright, or type in this sort of squiggly, barely legible text. Because these are things that typically computers will struggle to do. So in order to even make your guess, you got to be able to get over this hurdle, which once again prevents just some sort of script or bot from doing this. And if you want to say for a second, well, hold on, there's computer vision algorithms and there's all sorts of complicated things that could probably solve these. So it's not really proven that you're a human. I would say, well, yes, even if you were able to make something that could solve these problems and do it consistently, it's not going to be fast. It's going to take some processing time and processing power to do it. And if you add even just a little bit of time to each guess iteration, imagine multiplying that by a million tries. It's going to significantly slow you down, and it's almost going to make the whole process just not worth it because you're not even guaranteed a payoff because you'd be doing this for a single account. So CAPTCHAs are also a really good way to go. So with all of that, we make good, strong passwords. We're not using passwords that were leaked, and we can prevent the bots from spamming. So our accounts have to be safe now, right? That there's nothing else that could possibly go wrong. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case because we're not the only people that have to have our passwords. For them to serve their purpose, the server also has to have access to our password. That way, when we give it to the server can check it against what it has saved to say, oh, yeah, I know you. That is your password. You are who you say you are. Come on in. And this is where some more problems can come in. So in this example, the passwords have been saved in what we call plain text, which means they're human readable. If you were to get access to this database, which you could do through multiple avenues, you could use like SQL injection attacks. You could have like a malicious insider or something that gains access to the database and leaks it to the outside. There's multiple ways that you could get access to this database, or it could otherwise become compromised and end up on the internet. Once that happens, because all these passwords are in plain text, anyone that reads them can go and grab them, immediately go to the website, do whatever they want. So since I can see this password right now, I could go to wherever this came from, whatever website, type in John Smith's username, password's the password, I'm in his account, and I can do whatever he could do. So this is really bad. Don't ever do this. If you're working in web development, if you have a server, please, if you don't remember anything else, please don't save your passwords as plain text in the database. Instead, what you want to do is you want to use a hashing algorithm. So a hash is a one-way function. It's going to take that input string. It's going to be that password. It's going to take it in, put it through a mangling function, which does as the name would imply, it mangles it, it twists it up, it makes it into something unrecognizable, and it spits out this little hash manifest, this little hash signature. Here's an example right there where we take the password, we apply SHA-512, and we get this out. It looks nothing like the original text. And this is one way. So you can't go from this manifest back to the password. One way. And when you're doing this, make sure you pick a secure hashing algorithm. You're going to want to use something that's well known, and you're not going to want to implement it yourself. So pick something like SHA-256, SHA-512. There's tons of resources out there. Do your research. Find a good one. Don't use one that's been cracked or otherwise compromised like MD5. MD5 is default on a lot of database systems, I believe, and it's not secure because it has hash collisions, which basically means that two of these strings result in that same hash value. They collide, and that can leak information about how the hash is working, which also leaks information about how the text is changed into the hashed value. So just don't use MD5. And the way this will work in practice is instead of saving that plain text password, you're going to save this big block of gibberish instead. And when the user types in their password and it comes to you, you're going to apply the same hash function, which is going to spit out the same big block of gibberish. You're going to compare it against the block in the database, say, yes, these are the same. This is the person that they say they are, and then they get to come in. So there's no beating that. Now we have to be safe. I mean, how are you going to reverse that big block of gibberish? Where there's a will, there's a way. So hashing algorithms are well known. This isn't security by obscurity. So everyone knows and has access to these hashing algorithms. In fact, you can use these hashing algorithms like right now if you have Python in your machine. I actually used this hashlib library when I was making these slides. And here's just a little example showing you how it can be used. So I downloaded the entire King James Bible from Project Gutenberg. Awesome resource. Highly recommended if you've never heard of it. Maybe I'll make a video about it sometime in the future. But anyway, we read in the whole Bible and we encode it using SHA-256. We get this little hash string here. And then we encode hello world here. And notice that these two hash strings are the same length. So we don't even get to know how long the original string was. And that's just beautiful. That's amazing. So if I just showed you these two, you would never guess which one was hello world and which one was the Bible. And the Bible is massive. And hello world is so, so small. So that's just a little bit about how this is working. And also, it's just accessible to you. You can go get it. Because you can go and get it, so can the attackers, right? If you're using a hashing algorithm, which is out there, they have it too. Now, the other part of this is there are leaked databases out there. And while you can't just get at the passwords because they're hashed, they're not in plain text, we can do something called an offline attack. What we were doing with the bot or with the script, just spamming passwords, would be called an online attack, and we've effectively stopped that. But an offline attack would take one of these leaked databases, and now you don't have that sort of time constraint. You can just work at this and hack away at it as long as you want. So when the database of hashed passwords is leaked, you can look at, well, let's say I could take the most common passwords. I could use SHA-256 on all of them. Now I have all those common passwords in their hashed form. And I check to see if those hashed passwords are in the leaked database. And I can work backwards. If one of those hashes is in there, then I know what the password was that got there. And that is what a rainbow table is. Except for you don't have to make it. These rainbow tables themselves already exist. You can go out there and download them. For example, John the Ripper comes with rainbow tables. It's got some big rainbow tables inside of it, which they don't actually physically look like this. So this is a nice colorful illustration of what it could look like that could help you conceptualize it. Where you've got your plain text here and you've got a hash here. And like we just described, if you wanted to target any account, you would say, go and tell me if any of these hashes are in that database. And if they are, tell me which ones, and I'll know to use those passwords to get into those accounts. I don't care whose they are, I just want to get into some accounts. We can also use the rainbow table in a more targeted way, where you look at the leaked database and say, yeah, that one, I want to get into that person's account. You take that person's hashed password, you see if it's in the rainbow table. And if you find it in the rainbow table, you look at its corresponding plain text entry. Boom, you got that person's password. So you can use it in both ways. It's a very similar thing, but you can use it by looking at the rainbow table to reference the leaked database, or looking at the leaked database and referencing the rainbow table. Alrighty, so is there a way that we can get around this? Can we resolve this, or are we just sunk? Well, we can do something called salting. And it's just like in cooking, salt's it's a little something extra. It's a little something that's going to give it some flavor, if you will. So I think an example is the best way to explain what a salt is. So here is our familiar password. Let's say that this is our hashing function, our hashing algorithm, and this is the resulting hash. I've truncated it so that it would fit in the slides, but for all intents and purposes, this is the hash that we get out, okay? Well, this is what would show up in the rainbow table. This is what we want to avoid. So instead of just hashing the password, what if we added something random to it first? So here we've picked our salt to be 101001. So we will add this value to every password before we hash it. And now we get this out. This is completely different because technically, the password would be password 101001, right? Because that's what went into the hashing function. And this looks nothing like this. In fact, there's nothing that relates these two together because the hash function is designed to not let you get any sort of information. If you were to change even one letter in password, the resulting hash would be completely different, which is another beautiful thing about hash functions. Just a side note, Python dictionaries use hash functions. That's how you can use them for lookup. Whenever you put something into, you make a key in a dictionary, it hashes the key to a memory address. Just FYI, it's got nothing to do with this, but cool little piece of information. So yeah, the salt will change what the hash will look like. So if you keep your salt secret and you make sure that it's random, none of the passwords are going to match the passwords in a rainbow table, which is great. That's great. It means you've beat the rainbow table. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be data leakage. So something else that could happen is, let's say, I don't know, hundreds of users all had the same password. It's going to be a common password, right? And you've got the list of the most common passwords. In the leaked database, you're going to see the same hash over and over and over and over again. You might not know what it is, but you're going to see it very frequently. The frequency of those hashes is information. So information has been leaked from the database. And you could use that to help you guess what that might be, right? So I have a suspicion that this is password just based on how many times it showed up. So now I just need to guess the right salt that is going to give me this hash and where the salt needs to go. So it could be at the beginning or it could be at the end. It's wherever you want to put it. So is there a way that you could avoid that? Yes. What if every password in your database had its own salt? What if you had some sort of a function that picked the salt and added the salts? Now, you wouldn't want something as simple as the first password gets the salt 1, the second password gets the salt 2, and so on and so forth. It's too predictable. The function itself needs to be random. It needs to be something that's going to be unpredictable at the very least, because if it's predictable, then the attacker is going to be able to work backwards, and if they were to crack it, they'd be able to crack the whole thing. But at that point, if you're able to accomplish that, then every instance of the same password in your database will also have a different hash, meaning not even that information is going to be leaked anymore. And that would be great. That's the ideal situation, that an attacker is not going to be able to get anything out of your leaked database. They're not going to know how many times a password shows up. They're not going to know what passwords show up. It's just going to be, I don't know what's in there. They're just going to have to guess and check. They're going to be right back where they started with these brute force attacks. And then that's where it comes in, where if you've got a password with really high entropy, they're not going to get it because it's going to take forever. So some final thoughts. There are other mitigations here as well. Two-factor authentication is a good one. You can add some, one factor would be what you are. That would be biometrics, things like fingerprint scans or facial recognition. These are some of the more common ones. Even like how you type, how you walk, these sorts of things. It's what you are. Another two-factor authentication modality would be something that you have. So these are probably, you've encountered these before, I'm sure. Would be like a text that you get on your phone or the Duo mobile app that you have to swipe to get into your accounts. Could also be like a little RSA key that you keep with you, or a little USB drive that has a RSA key on it that you have to plug in to prove that you are you. Something that you physically have, not just something that you know. Now, these still aren't foolproof. There's ways to get around them. There's all sorts of like social engineering things like SIM swapping, but we won't get into all of that here. And there's also password managers, and this really solves the problem of making a password easy to remember, but also hard to guess, because you don't have to remember it. And these things are really, really hard to guess because they can be like 50, 100, 150 characters long. And there's no pattern to them. They are reasonably random. And in fact, if they aren't random, then there's a problem. So you want to make sure you're using a good password manager in that respect as well. And another nice thing about those is they can generate passwords really quickly and they can update your passwords as well, right? So you can say, well, I want my password for this to be changed. Do it. It happens in an instant. It doesn't really affect you any because you didn't have to remember it in the first place. So if there was some sort of a data breach and you were afraid that your passwords have been compromised or your accounts have been compromised, you can change all your passwords really quick. One thing you might want to consider, though, is this in a way, if you're using a bad password manager or the password manager has some sort of a vulnerability in it, you've introduced this single point of failure because the password manager manages all your passwords. And if you could somehow get beyond that guardian, beyond that firewall, beyond that whatever, then the attacker would also have access to all your passwords. That is, if they're not being stored properly. And that's a whole another area. We're not going to get into it anymore. So there are other ways that you can lose your passwords as well. I think we mentioned a lot of these briefly. There's key logging, so you can install some malware on your computer by mistake that is covertly basically spying on you and keeping track of all the keys that you're pressing. That can result in your password being stolen. There's also shoulder surfing, which is something that might happen when you're out in public. A person could just be looking over your shoulder as you're typing in your password. This won't happen if you've got your password like saved in your browser, saved in your password manager. But if you're logging in on a new machine, like maybe at the public library or something, this could happen. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a person. It could be a camera. A security camera could be watching your keystrokes. Another thing that could happen is social engineering and phishing. So in this, an example would be getting an email that's saying that you need to log into your account. It's critical. They need to authenticate you for X, Y, or Z, right? It's always going to be urgent. And you just give them your username and password. They don't have to guess anything. You just hand it to them. And this happened back in 2015, 2016 with the WikiLeaks John Podesta thing. There was an email in there that showed that he'd been phished. It was basically a whaling attack is what you would call it because they were targeting, or I guess it was spear phishing because they were targeting one guy, right? So that's phishing and social engineering in a nutshell. Once again, there could be an entire video on just that topic. That's another way that you could lose your passwords. So here are the main takeaways. And if you're still with me, bear with me a little longer. This is the last slide. So for the user, you want to make your password secure by using these alphanumeric characters and symbols. You want to make your characters at least 8 characters long. The longer they are, the better. They might get harder to remember, which is a problem. But as far as introducing entropy, the longer they are, the better. As long as you're also obeying this next bullet, that you're avoiding common passwords or words that are found in a dictionary. You don't want to be the victim of a dictionary attack. You shouldn't be reusing passwords across sites, particularly for important accounts. So your bank account password should never, under any circumstances, be the same as your Club Penguin password. In the moment, it might seem like a good idea, but it shouldn't. And you should use multi-factor authentication where possible. It's not foolproof like we talked about, but it's going to add that additional hurdle. And a lot of security is adding these hurdles. You want to make yourself a hard target That way, it's almost not worth the effort for someone to come after you. You want them to give up because they can go after someone easier. Now, if you're a developer, these are the takeaways for you. You want to limit login attempts and use Captcha to deter those bots. That's basic. That's 101. You want to do that. This also is 101. Even if you're not doing the first thing, do this. For the love of all that is holy, never store passwords in plain texts. You should use tried, tested, and secure hashing algorithms. So that means do your research. Make sure you're not using one that's from way, way, way back that has long since been cracked, because these attackers will know that it's been cracked and they'll know how to exploit it. But that also means don't think that you can go and make or implement your own hashing algorithm. Unless you've got an entire team of mathematics PhDs and years of time to devote to rigorously testing this thing, don't. Just don't go and make your own hashing algorithm. If the thought even crosses your mind, just go home for the day, take a rest, rethink what it is you're doing. You do not want to make your own hashing algorithm. And lastly, add salt to your passwords before you hash them. It's simple. It doesn't cost you anything. Just keep track of what your hash is, keep it secret, make it random, and it will prevent, or at least make the dictionary attacks, or rainbow table attacks, excuse me, significantly more difficult. And if you want to test your comprehension, here's a couple questions for you. I won't waste a ton of time here going through them, but if you think you know the answers to these, why don't you just leave them down in the comments below? And here are the references. I'll also put these in the description for this video. And if you enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out a lot. And I'll see you guys in the next video.